Last week's rescue is widely described as an embarrassing setback for the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia known as FARC. Not one shot was fired when Colombian intelligence officials tricked the rebels into handing over 15 hostages in the Colombian jungle last week. Experts and analysts now say they see a crisis within the oldest guerrilla group in Latin America. Patrick Estehuelas of the Eurasia Group says the FARC could be coming apart.
It's the beginning of the end of the FARC guerrilla movement as we know it.
The FARC began in 1964 as a Marxist-oriented rural rebel army. Its initial income came from extortion of land-owning elites and emerging drug lords. By the 1980s, the FARC began charging farmers and drug lords for protection, allowing the group to increase its manpower and to purchase more weapons. In a few years, the FARC activities evolved into an alliance with drug lords. Today, experts estimate that between 60 and 90% of the FARC's income comes from the illicit drug business. Adam Isaacson, a political analyst with the nonprofit Washington think tank Center for International Policy, says the FARC fronts operating closer to Venezuela are entirely dedicated to drugs.
From taxing the growers to buying the coca paste to turning it into cocaine, crystal cocaine, and to getting it to through the corridors in Colombia, and in some cases getting it out of the country. That's where we don't know how far it goes, though. We have heard that the FARC have contacts with Mexican cartels.
Isaacson estimates that about 20% of the FARC income comes from kidnapping. The group's 70 fronts, or local cells, now hold about 700 hostages, and its total income, he estimates, is in the hundreds of millions.
I would say at least half a billion a year.
With estimates of FARC membership running up to 18,000, Isaacson says that the defection of hundreds of rebels this year indicates some fronts are facing political and economic difficulties. Several $billion in U.S. aid has helped the Colombian government infiltrate and disrupt FARC operations. There have been arrests and assassinations. In the last few months, FARC's founder died and 2 senior leaders were killed. The government campaign interrupted communications between many of the fronts. Eduardo Gamarra of the Latin American and Caribbean Center at the Florida International University says the stated purpose of the U.S. money was to eradicate coca production.
The investment was originally to stop the flow of drugs into the United States. If you gauge it from that perspective, then the plan has not worked. If you gauge it from the perspective of dismantling the major guerrilla force, the most important drug trafficking organization, then it's a huge, huge success.
Okay, vamos. According to the UN, Colombia's production of coca leaf used to produce cocaine increased 27% last year. But the FARC could be in a crisis, says Patrick Estehuelas.
The FARC have not been left with too many options. Right now, they are too busy surviving and are not capable of staging anything close to a military resurgence.
Colombian analysts and public opinion surveys give the FARC less than a 1% approval rating in Colombia. But while many agree that the FARC has lost members and faces one of its most difficult moments, they also warn that it is probably far from being eliminated. For producer Zulima Palacio, this is Simkins, VOA News.